Good morning, friends. I'm Simona Picchini. I'm a senior investigator and clinical pharmacologist at Drug Abuse and Doping Unit at the National Institute of Health, Rome, Italy. Today, we will start with another interesting learning episode of Forensic Pharmacology Part 1. This episode is devoted to workplace drug testing. We will have 7 different modules. Module number 1, Introduction of Workplace Drug Testing. Module number 2, Evolution of Workplace Drug Testing. Module number 3, Examination of Workplace Drug. Module number 4, Sample Collection. Module number 5, Screening Test. Module number 6, Qualitative and Quantitative Examination. And finally, Module number 7, Conclusion. It was firstly established in United States of America within the framework of drug-free workplace established by the government for governmental employees before being hired and after being hired. The aim was the following. The aim was not to take a drug addict employee and have problem, and the aim of drug testing after hiring an employee is to control his behavior and in case introduce the employees inside a detoxification program. This workplace drug testing was also linked with the problem of risky jobs. In fact, workplace drug testing in America was firstly established for drivers of trucks, cars, airplanes, because this was considered a risky job, putting other person in the risk of an addicted individual. In America, it's normally conducted as a pro-employment test, and in governmental employees and also in the private companies which require this workplace drug testing, once in a year, by surprise, without not saying to the individuals, in different biological matrices. America is using urine, hair, and sometimes saliva. The first concept was not to violate the intimacy of the individual. So blood was prohibited, but after sometimes also urine was considered a violation of the privacy of the individual. So now it is usually based on hair testing. Saliva is sometimes considered because drug testing in saliva accounts for current use of a drug. So imagine that you are a driver of a train and testing is conducted just before starting driving the train. So using saliva and using an on-site test, in minutes you can see if the individual is addicted to alcohol or to any drugs of abuse, and in case stopping the driving of a train or a plane for the safety of other individuals. From US, workplace drug testing came into Europe. In the first moment, in Northern Europe, and only recently in the Mediterranean area. Why? Because workplace drug testing presents a cost for the government and also a cost for the private industry. And also, if you stop a working individual, you have to replace him. So this is a double cost. These two reasons stopped the introduction of workplace drug testing in many European countries. But then, after a very important and very serious problem with the death, for example, of some children in a bus driven by an individual who had consumed cannabis, or some accidents in trains conducted by drivers having consumed cannabis, immediately workplace drug testing was introduced also in Europe, but with different rules from countries to other countries regarding which biological matrix should be used for workplace drug testing. Some are using urine, some are using saliva. Italy, for example, is using urine and hair, and saliva for the drivers of trains and planes to conduct a test just before the driving, to look for actual consumption of drugs of abuse. So, we don't have pre-employment workplace drug testing in Europe because this would be very expensive and it is considered violating the privacy of the individual. We have at the moment just an annual workplace drug testing by surprise to control if an individual is consuming drugs. In those countries in which government or private enterprises would like to know also if an individual is not only consuming a drug, but it is also an abuser, a chronic consumer, higher testing for drugs of abuse should have to be performed, because the only test in urine just accounts for recent consumption, which cannot be linked to a chronic consumption. So, the analysis of 5 centimeter segments, the last proximal 5 centimeter segments proximal to the scalp of the hair, accounts for a consumption in the last 5 months, and this can demonstrate a chronic consumption. In this case, the individual is invited and addressed to a detoxification center. First of all, we should say that theoretically any drug should be examined, any drugs of abuse, but this is not possible at the moment. Why? Because usually 2 types of analytical methods are used, screening and then quantitative methods. But we know that screening methods are established as on-site test or immunological test just for classical drugs of abuse, opioids, cannabinoids, cocaine, amphetamines, and in some places benzodiazepines. So what about the other drugs of abuse? What about the other psychoactive drugs? They cannot be checked unless a screening test with a very specific methodologies such as chromatography linked to mass spectrometry is used. But it is very expensive. So first of all, just few groups of drugs of abuse are controlled in the workplace. Then, depending on the biological matrix used for workplace drug testing, parent drugs or metabolites have to be checked. For example, in case of saliva, method should be established to look for parent drugs, because in saliva very seldomly metabolites are encountered. So we should consider that we have to organize methods for parent drugs and also cutoff for parent drugs. Which are cutoff? Cutoff are concentration threshold values above what the individual is considered positive to a consumption to a certain drugs of abuse. Below this threshold value, individual is not considered as a consumer of drugs of abuse, even if a drug is present but in a low concentration. These are the rules. In case of heroin, just metabolites have to be investigated. And so, both screening method and quantitative methods should be devoted to metabolites. Parent drugs and metabolites are both looked for with very sensitive methods, which are required. Why? Because in hair, substances are present in very low concentration. This is not the case of urine, even if there are also threshold values for urine. But in case of hair, we are speaking about nanogram per milligram hair. So we have to consider that we have to use very sensitive methods and laboratories which can present method validation and quality manual, so they can work accurately and precisely. We will speak about sample collection considering the different samples: saliva, urine, and hair. Okay. In all the cases, we will collect 3 different samples, A, B, C. A and B will be used for screening test and confirmation. Sample C has to be stored and can be used by individual to refuse the results of the analysis. Okay. In all the cases, samples have to be collected in front of a doctor, of a nurse, controlling that the biological matrix collected for workplace drug testing belongs to a certain individual. This means that saliva can be collected with appropriate devices for saliva collection in front of the doctor by the individual. In case of urine, the operation will be of the collection of urine will be in front of the physician of the nurses in an open bathroom. In case of hair, the same doctor or the nurses will operate the cutting of the hair at the basis of the scalp and put in 3 different envelopes. This operation has to be conducted in legal medical conditions because any part of the operation should be recorded in a future time in case the individual refuses the results of the testing. This means that, first, the individual has to be recognized by a documentation, personal documentation. Then a form has to be filled with all the data of the individual, and the individual has to sign this form. This form has to be filled 3 times. One form goes with the individual, the other with the nurse and for the screening test, and the third for the confirmation test. So the individual accepts the test and declares if he took any medication which can interfere with the workplace drug testing. Any medication which is not declared at the moment of sample collection won't be added afterwards. So an individual cannot claim that the results are not good because he consumed such or such other drugs, because he has to declare at the beginning. So he signed a form with all the information. He signed a form that he accepts the workplace drug testing, and then a chain of custody which accompany the samples for any moment is also provided. The first test for the presence of drugs of abuse has to be a screening test. This test can be on-site, if there is a possibility to test on-site for certain drugs of abuse, or can be also conducted in a lab. Usually it is preferred to do an immediate examination and so to try to use an online test. Online tests are usually immunochromatographic stripes which are colored like a pregnancy test in the presence of the drug of abuse. So, for example, in case of saliva, this immunochromatographic test can be put directly on saliva and wait for the visual response. The same for urine. In any case, some countries do not accept the visual response for an on-site test. In this case, it is advisable to couple a portable detector which can read the colored results and transformed, for example, as an absorbance, and have also a printer to have a printed document of the on-site test. This is preferable because immediately the individual is screened for the presence of drug of abuse, even if we have to remember that a screening test has no value in legal medicine. And always a confirmation test has to be carried on. If the screening test is not conducted on site, it can be executed in laboratory by, for example, immunologic tests. They can be easily conducted in hospital or in laboratory. They identify classes of drugs. This can be done for saliva and for urine, but this immunological test cannot be performed in case of hair. In case of hair should be digested, analyzed, extracted, and examined by separative techniques based on chromatography and the detection technique based on mass spectrometry. This requires a long time, but remember that hair analysis is used only in cases in which you want to confirm drug addiction, chronic drug addiction, and not a workplace drug testing. Also, chromatographic methods can be applied in case of screening test if the government or the private citizens want to ask also for the presence of other psychoactive drugs which cannot be detected by immunological tests or normal screening test. Some countries, some Northern European countries, are now conducting drug testing in urine by ultra-performance liquid chromatography coupled to mass spectrometry. In this way, apart from the classical drugs of abuse, also synthetic cannabinoids, synthetic catechins, and new drugs of abuse plus hallucinogens can be detected, can be at least screened for their presence before going on a confirmation. If a screening test is negative, workplace drug testing is stopped at this point. So the second sample B, is discarded, and it is also discarded sample C because individual is considered not consuming any drugs of abuse. In case of a positive answer to the screening test, the workplace drug testing is continued by a confirmation using the sample B, and at the same time sample C is put in stored condition under controlled condition because it constituted a legal medical proof. As I said before, when a screening test is resulted positive, we have to proceed with a confirmatory test. In this case, we have to use a methodological analysis which is precise, accurate, and can have a legal medical value in front of the court if the individual refuses, for example, the results of the examination. Usually, for confirmatory analysis in workplace drug testing, chromatographic techniques coupled to mass spectrometry are always used. No other techniques are accepted in case of saliva, hair, and urine. As I told you before, we have to module the different analyzed to be confirmed for the three different matrices. Parent drugs in case of saliva, metabolites in case of urine, and parent drugs and metabolites in case of air, with different windows of concentration ranges. We have to remember that legally we can confirm just the class of substances resulted positive to a screening test. This means that if the individual resulted positive to cocaine, we cannot look for opioids or amphetamine. This is legally prohibited because a screening test already said that the individual is negative to those substances through a certain threshold concentration. This means that maybe or maybe not the individual can show some drugs of abuse under this threshold concentration. But the confirmation of substances under the cutoff level is prohibited. So, we will confirm just the class of substances resulted positive to screening test. Opiates, the single opiates, 6-monoacetylmorphine, morphine, codeine, buprenorphine, methadone in case of an individual in a detoxification center, cocaine and benzoyl ecgonine, cocaine in case of saliva, benzoyl ecgonine in case of urine, cocaine and benzoyl ecgonine in case of air, all possible amphetamines in case of a positivity to amphetamines in saliva and in urine and in air. Because in case of amphetamines, parent drugs are always present with the metabolites. In case of a positivity to cannabis, in saliva we will look for delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol, while in urine we will look for the acidic metabolites of delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol. In air, we will look for delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol plus cannabidiol and cannabinol. And if we have very sensitive methodologies like tandem mass spectrometry, we could have also the opportunity to look for the acidic metabolites of THC also in hair. Cutoff concentration are established not only for screening test, but also for confirmation test. And also in this case, we will give a positive results if the substance under investigation present a concentration above the cutoff level. If the concentration is below the cutoff level, we will refer this sample as negative with no numerical value of the concentration of a certain substance. So, the result form, which is finally given to the government in case of governmental employees or to the private companies in case of private employees, should contain all the data of the analyzed individual, the declaration of any medication taken by the individual, the results of the screening test, which has to be only qualitative, no numerical value, positive to a certain class of substances or negative. If it is negative, we don't have any results for the confirmatory analysis. If the screening test is positive, then we have also a place for the results of the confirmatory analysis. If we are above a certain cutoff, we will provide a numerical value. If we are below a cutoff, we should just say not confirmed with no numerical value. The responsible for the analysis should sign, and the form is given to the government or to the private company. At this point, the individual is informed of the results of the workplace testing, and in case of positivity, he can refuse the results of the test. He has a third sample of saliva, hair, or urine available for re-examination. Re-examination is at the charge of the individual. This means that the individual has to pay himself for this re-examination, and he has the possibility to choose the laboratory in which the re-examination is executed, in the presence or in the absence of an eventual lawyer. Workplace drug testing has been established to check drug of abuse consumption by governmental and non-governmental employees with risky jobs, with the aim of saving the life of other individuals involved in this job. For example, for drivers of trucks, cars, airplanes, trains, for drivers of school buses, of also touristic buses, but also in case of hospital doctors or doctors at the emergency department. And in some countries, it has been also proposed for teachers at primary and secondary school. We believe that this is an important step for the health of all the society, and also to remind to everybody that the consumption of drug of abuse is a risky situation for the individual himself and for his environment. Thank you.